Hey everybody, U.S. immigration lawyer Michael Ishuri here, and in today's video, I want to go over what to expect in your E2 visa interview. So specifically, when somebody's applying for their E2 visa at a consulate or an embassy abroad, towards the end of the process, they have to attend an interview, usually, where an immigration officer will ask them various questions about their business. Now, many people wonder what types of questions are going to be asked of me in this interview. Well, in this video, I want to provide some general questions that may or may not be asked of you. In our experience, many of these questions routinely get asked of our clients. So I think you're going to find this information helpful. Without further ado, I want to jump right in. You go to the interview and the immigration officer may ask you, what are you here today for? Or why are you here today? And of course, the answer to such a question is that you're here to conduct your E2 visa interview. Now, another question that they may ask is, what is the name of your company? And what is the ownership structure of your company? Now, of course, the name is just to get some general information, and they'll likely have the name as part of the material that you've already submitted to them. But the ownership structure, the reason that they're asking about the ownership structure is to see what percentage of equity, what ownership percentage you have in the company, and to make sure that the company is at least 50% owned by citizens of an E2 treaty country. So far, very general questions. Now, another question that they may ask is, what does your company in the United States do? And again, very basic question where you're explaining what it is that your company does. Another question that may be asked of you is, why are you qualified to operate such a business? So for example, if you're going to be opening a landscaping business in the United States and they ask you why you're qualified to operate such a business, they're asking that to determine whether you have any experience whatsoever in landscaping, what your experience is in business. They want to know, if we give them this visa, what is the likelihood that they'll be successful in this business? Have they ever had any experience in landscaping? What is that experience? So here, they're looking for you to explain why you're qualified to conduct such business activities in the United States. And they want to be reassured that you have what it takes to be successful in this business. Now, another question that they may ask you is, what is your role with this company? What are your duties with this company? And the idea behind this question is that as somebody that's applying for their E2 visa, you are required to be seeking entry to the United States to direct and develop your business. So if you were going to be opening up a coffee shop and you're going to be doing an E2 visa, you can't be a barista. You're not supposed to be the cashier taking the orders and making the lattes. Your role with the company for an E2 visa is to direct and develop the business. So when they're asking you this question regarding what your role is, what your duties are, they're asking this to determine whether your role is such that you're directing and developing the business as opposed to just doing the day-to-day work of this business. So that's an important thing to be aware of. Now, another question that they may ask you is, how much money have you invested in this business? And of course, they're asking this because the E2 visa is an investment-based visa and they want to know whether you've made a substantial investment in the business. So they're going to ask you, how much have you invested? It's very likely that they may ask you that question. So you should be aware of how much has been invested and what the various expenditures were made on. So what you've invested in. And that brings me to my next question, which is, what has the money been used for? What has the money been spent on? What expenditures have you made? And they may be asking you this question for a number of reasons. For one, they may be seeking assurance that the money has actually been put at risk. So that the money is not just sitting in the business's bank account, but that it's actually been spent on things that your business needs. So again, they may ask you where the money has been spent. And you should be prepared to answer that, and you should have a knowledge of where your expenditures have been made. And when you're going in for the interview, you should be very knowledgeable of your specific application packet so that if the immigration officer asks you for receipts demonstrating that the expenditures have been made, you can quickly open up to that part of your application that has the receipts and you can quickly provide them to the officer or direct them to where the receipts are in the application packet. You can tell the officer, oh, please turn to page 20, for example. Now, another question that the immigration officer may ask you is, where did you get the money that you used to invest in the business? And they're asking you this question because as part of the E2 visa requirements, your investment funds must come from a lawful source. So they're asking you where you got these investment funds from to be able to determine that the funds actually came from a lawful source. So you should be very well versed in where your investment funds came from. If $50,000 of the investment came from a gift from your sibling, you should know that. And if $20,000 came from the sale of a property, for example, you should know that. So you should have a well-rounded and well-versed understanding of the breakdown of your investment funds and where they came from. And similar to the question that I asked earlier, if the immigration officer asks for a gift letter or asks for proof of the sale of the property, you should know where those documents are in your packet so that you can quickly bring them up as needed in the interview. Another question that the immigration officer may ask is the business already operational, or when will the business be operational? And they're asking this in some part to determine how far along you are in this business. Is the business already operating, or is this business several months away from operating and still has a lot to do? Because when you're going in for your E2 visa interview, your business should either already be operational or it should be very close to being operational. For example, it should be to the point where if it's not already operational, all that's remaining is for you to get your visa so that you can come to the United States and start operating it. But you shouldn't be in a position where there are still several things to take place before your business can be operational. You shouldn't be in a position where you're at the interview and you still need licenses and you still need to get your lease and you still need all these other things to take place before you can operate. Because then the immigration officer could say that your business, it's too early for you to start applying for the visa. You still have to get this business farther along before you can apply. So when they're asking, is the business already operational, or when will the business be operating, they're trying to figure out how far along you are in this process and whether it might be too early for you to apply for this visa. Another question that they may ask is, does your company have any employees? If so, how many employees does it have? Now, having employees, while it's not absolutely required to get an E2 visa application approved, it is very helpful because with the E2 visa, there's this requirement that the business cannot be marginal. A marginal business is basically a business that's small. It only benefits the E2 investor and their family to generate some sort of a minimal living. And when you have employees, for one, it helps to combat this inference that your business is marginal. And also, it helps to show that your business is actually real and operating. It's not some idea that you have of a business that you're planning on doing months down the line. But when you have employees, it's really that added proof in the pudding that this is a real business, this is legitimate, etc. And just a couple more questions to go over. The immigration officer may ask you when you plan to come to the United States and how long you plan to stay in the United States once you're here. And they may have various reasons for asking these questions, but you should have answers ready regarding when you plan to come to the United States and how long you plan to stay. And regarding those questions, you should specifically discuss with your immigration attorney in terms of the most appropriate way to answer those questions in light of your personal circumstances. But generally, so far, we've gone over some of the most common questions that get asked during the E2 visa interview. We covered questions regarding the ownership of the business, regarding the nature of the business and why you're qualified to operate such a business. We talked about evidence of the actual investment regarding how much has been invested, what the investment funds went toward, what did the investment funds go to purchase, and we talked about where the business is currently. Is the business currently operating? Is it on the verge of being operational? And various other questions. Again, these are some of the most common questions that get asked during this interview. So when you're preparing for your E2 visa interview, while you shouldn't be in a situation where it's like you're reading off a script, it shouldn't be these generic answers that you've memorized, but you should have responses ready. So now that you see some of the common questions that get asked during this interview, it's important for you to adequately prepare going into your interview. You don't want to be in a position where these basic questions are asked of you and you're totally caught off guard and you don't have answers. You should have an understanding of each of these questions, and you should have an answer ready regarding each of these questions. So when somebody asks you how much you've invested in the business, you should know that clearly. There really isn't a good explanation for why you don't know that. So not having solid answers to these questions can be harmful in the interview process. So again, you want to make sure that you're well prepared. You want to have a thorough understanding of your E2 application, and this will ultimately help you when you go in for the interview. So I hope you found this information helpful. I hope that this was overall a useful video